During his tenure as the Fagar priest for the people of Tameworth, Father Anselm Greyspire was described as many things. To some, he was a bringer of absolution and forgiveness. To others, he was a man dedicated to the Creator's work, sheltering the people from the evils of wild magics that fester in the heart of Zarathis. To a few, Father Greyspire was a trusted confidant, though these were indeed few, as Greyspire's thoughts were often his own, and to share them would be to involve others in trials of which they were better off being ignorant. Yet among all of Father Greyspire's many traits, all the people of Tameworth knew him for his love of music. Perhaps it was his past as a choir boy in the prominent chantries of the Fagar that had instilled this drive to explore the complexities of song, or perhaps the rigid structure of the chantries had stifled him so that he sought musical inspiration from other sources. Nonetheless, if there was a way to add musical melodies and harmonies to a flat, stale chant, or a fiddle playing a jive at a local dancing event, Father Anselm Greyspire was sure to be involved. Indeed, so many songs and chants had he written himself that a few had even made the long, winding journey down the southern slope of the unscaled summit, east through Fideb Forest, and back to the High Sanctum Assembly of Belhaven for inclusion in the Book of Rites and Recitations of the Fagar. And thus, it was both a surprise and at the same time sensible to everyone when Father Greyspire announced to the congregation of the faithful in the mountainside community of Tameworth that he had invited a talented singer, a celebrity from the capital, to come perform in St. Aderan's Rest, the abbey sanctum in Tameworth over which he was the shepherd. The congregation eagerly awaited the celebrity's arrival, for even as far back as this time, the journey through Fideb Forest was treacherous, and it was no small thing for the coach to brave the slopes of the unscaled summit to reach the small town that dwelt halfway up the mountain. Some weeks later, another summons was sent, this time to the Blessed Wardens of Belhaven. An accusation of vile sorcery, corrupted worship, and abominations brought forth in the Creator's holy sanctuary, filled with descriptions of things that could be neither denied nor ignored. When the wardens completed their trek through Fideb and up the mountain to reach Tameworth, they were met by the sender of this second summons. It was not Father Greyspire, as had been signed in shaky, messy script, but a modest woodcraftsman of Tameworth, Halric Durnlow. His height and clothing suggested that, at one time, he was a large and bear-like man, and in his face were the lined remnants of many smiles. But now his clothing hung loosely over his gangly frame, and all mirth had departed from him for the remainder of his days. Of all the inhabitants of Tameworth, no others were willing to speak to the wardens, and so Halric Durnlow crept back into his empty shop, followed by the authorities, who barred the doors, set a guard, and demanded answers to the accusations that had brought them to the town. The pitiable Durnlow began his story with the arrival of the singer from Belhaven. The first thing the townsfolk noticed about the well-dressed Corvin Althiel was that he was tall and strikingly pale. He stepped off the coach with only a single bag in his hands, which was quickly carried to its resting place by an enthusiastic member of the beloved choir from St. Aderan's Rest, Mr. Oswin Candler, known for his baritone and desperate to get even the slightest bit of advice to improve his own melodies from this famed utterer. He later recalled that Corvin Althiel's voice was not what he'd expected, nor the soft, soothing flow or the strong-stringed tenor of a powerful throat, but something deeper and seemingly ancient, as though the young tall body contained a voice received from a place that the man himself had never been. Truly, said Candler to the other congregants later, this was the voice of a man blessed by the Creator. At the next morning's assembly in St. Aderan's Rest, not only Corvin Althiel stood among the worshippers, but also those wearing the vestments of Fagar priests come from Belhaven, surely to observe the proceedings. Whispers abounded, some of excitement, some of trepidation, but one thing was constant among all the congregants. All were eager to compare the guest of Father Greyspire to the droning, monotonous chants taught by the Fagar to their people. Was it truly wrong to love music so much that a man like Father Greyspire might be chastised for allowing his flock to experience the joy of a skilled singer, gifted by the Creator himself? By the end of the first chant, the Litany of Threefold Witness, the congregation was ready to defend their kindly, music-loving shepherd against any and all criticism from Belhaven. These thoughts grew as the sanctum continued with the recitations. The Litany of the Narrow Way, the chant of the Steadfast Gate, and the chant of 7 lamps. So passionately devoted were his congregants that, had the Fagar priests voiced even a word against Greyspire, St. Aderen's Rest would have excommunicated itself from the Fagar order and taken up the name of their man, risking both body and soul rather than tolerate what they viewed as legalistic hash. All thoughts of rebellion ceased when Corvin Althiel took the stage and began his performance. As expected, the lyrics were secular, and he sang a cappella since no sanctum instrument was permitted to accompany him. Even with all his melodic acumen, not even Father Grayspire could have prepared himself for what St. Aderen's Rest heard on that day. For the song was flawless, flowing from the throat gifted by the far off, and yet there came over the entire assembly such a sense of disconcerting distress, vexing and sinister, as could not be described in words, but only in the hearts of the hearers. The notes rang longer than breath should allow. Those who looked up toward the rafters of the pointed roof swore, though they swore only to themselves, that the very harmonies themselves shimmered just beyond the fullness of sight. Listeners in the front rows, who had come early to claim the best seats, fought the desire to recoil at the sensation of their bones vibrating in time, with alien and malign harmonic frequencies not meant to be witnessed on the mortal plane. As Corvin Althiel stepped off the platform, the congregation stared agape at him, though where the supreme horror lay in his visage they could not at once tell, but some felt that his smile toward them was not entirely good-natured after all. No one who had come seeking his attention now sought it, which was a fine thing, for the famous singer practically fled from the room when the congregation began their final chant, the canticle against the void. Unbeknownst to them, Althiel had immediately summoned his coach, which had driven off as fast as its burdened beasts could proceed over land. The Fagar observers from Belhaven did not speak with Father Grayspire, nor did they interact with the lay people of St. Aderen's Rest. Indeed, they did not make any gesture that gave approval or disapproval, and they vanished from the assembly nearly as quickly as the one whose presence had been the impetus for their attendance. Thus it was left to the congregation and their leader to make sense of what had taken place. None dared speak of it, for fear that the discomfort which had by now passed on might somehow reassert itself in even worse fashion should they seek to understand it. Whatever the Fagar might teach about such things was better left undiscovered, lest it prove them all similarly damned for having been party to this unorthodox event. And so the days continued much as they had before the perturbing song in their sanctuary. Yet the song did not remain in the past, for some members of the community heard the notes of the song hummed into the air. It was soon revealed that the tune of the song had caught on among some of the members of the choir. Initially, the townspeople did not put much stock in it, and many were determined to forget the discomfort from earlier. However, the more it was sung, the more the same uncanny harmonies began to drift through to the ears of all who heard them. Still, each person kept his or her anxious sensations to themselves until it became too much to ignore. Even when confronting the Sanctum Choir members, they did not mention the deep resonating frequencies, only questioning why the Sanctum chanters could be practicing music that was not in the Fagar Book of Rites and Recitations. When confronted about the secular nature of the music, each chanter vowed on his or her own soul that new words would be written, and only the tune itself would be kept. They spoke at length of their desire to use the music for the Creator's worship, inspired by Father Grayspire's love of craft. The following service, Father Grayspire was consulted about this and requested a private performance of these new lyrics set to the old tune. He emerged from the loft with tears in his eyes, though whether they were tears of joy or sorrow is now in doubt. Nonetheless, he proclaimed the same divine favor rested on his choir members as on the celebrity singer. It was proof, he said, that the Creator had blessed Tameworth with a new thing which came to be called the Ashen Song. It was quickly taught to the choir and performed the following week. The reaction was immediate and very much opposite to what they had experienced with Corvin Althiel, for the chanters had incorporated lyrics from the Book of Rites and Recitations set to the new tune they had learned. Durnlow spoke of this performance in hushed whispers, talking about how he felt youthful again, agile and light, as though he could leap a high wall in a single bound. This feeling of lifted lightness quickly turned into a hollowness. Durnlow claimed he was not the only one emptied by the song. Farmers worked their fields without fatigue, blacksmiths pounded away at their smithies with increased strength, and mothers saw their children learn to read, write, or walk almost immediately with their guidance. And yet, as the new hymn was repeated each week at St. Aderen's Rest, the empty sensation returned to the congregation, magnified each time. The members of the choir, now often secluded in the sanctum together with Father Gracespire, spent more and more time enhancing the tune, magnifying certain parts, altering lyrics, or, more often, removing them altogether and replacing them with long refrains of vocal exuberance that needed no accompanying words for the message to be felt in the heart. More and more members of the congregation joined the choir, and thus the song grew to such a greatness in length that more and more of the service was overtaken with the singing of it, and more than half the congregation took part in the performances. In one of his private moments, Halric Durnlow crept to the sanctum to speak privately with Father Gracespire about his concerns regarding the alteration of the services, for he spent much time pondering these frightful things in his heart. As he approached the parish, the flowing, sickening melody of the Ashen song washed over him. Inside his private chamber, Father Gracespire was found trembling, kneeling before the Book of Rites and Recitations, pleading for forgiveness. Though the song drowned out much of what Durnlow could hear, he begged the wardens to believe that Gracespire, even to the end, regretted what had come to pass. He had not invited Corvin Althiel of his own accord, Durnlow insisted. It had not been his idea to do what had been done to St. Aderen's Rest, what was being done even at that moment. By the following week, no member of the choir spoke in words of speech, but only in song. Day after day, the hollow Ashen song transformed them as they continued to sing it, soon at every waking hour. Within a day, it was reported that even during the restful hours of sleep in the night, the Ashen song did not cease to crawl from their throats, out past their lips, and worm its way into the ears of all who were near. The faces of the singers grew pale, their lips cracked, and their eyes shone with an irresistible, irrepressible zeal as the song became the sole purpose of their lives. None in Tameworth could escape it. Those who resisted in the beginning would find themselves humming its tune if they ceased to repress it in their minds even for a moment. Children sang snippets of the song at play to one another mindlessly so that it echoed across the fields and in the marketplaces. The whines and barks of the dogs began to resemble the melody, and the chirping of the birds in the nearby marsh resounded with the same empty notes. At this point in his tale, Durnlow screamed and began to beat his head upon his workshop table, restrained from shattering his skull and expelling his gray matter across the room only by the wardens, who insisted that he complete his narrative, no matter how much suffering it caused him. They tied him to a chair and beat him until he was no longer awake and his blood strewed across the floor, but Halric Durnlow would not relent in his screams. When he lost his wakeful consciousness, the wardens reported feeling their skin crawling as Durnlow's unconscious form began to hum a discord that struck them to their core. With a douse of cold water they woke him. He reluctantly resumed his account, for he had reached the climax of the saga, and it was why he had summoned them to his town. It happened late one night, when all of Tameworth slept fitfully, that the song began in a way they had not heard since the first performance of Corvin Althiel in the sanctuary of St. Aderen's Rest. At the same time, in the pitch dark, the bells of the sanctum rang, though no hands were upon the rope, and all were summoned to the sanctuary as though it was just another worship service. But when the congregation came to the sanctum, they could not force themselves to enter, for the choir was within, singing the final version of the Ashen song. It contained no words, and all notes were flawless. The shimmering harmonies drifted out through every window, every seam between the stones and shingles of the sanctum and parish, and the eyes of the congregation beheld the music in the fullness of sight as a sickening rainbow of off-colors that mortal eyes are never meant to behold. The chords rattled their teeth, cutting their lips and giving their blood a taste like the remains of a smoldering fire. Several of the men, including Halric Durnlow, forced their way into the sanctum to put a stop to the musical abomination, coming face to face with the horrific sight of the Ashen choir in all of its inverted, sacrilegious glory. In the pews of the choir loft, the pale, crumbling men and women swayed as one body, mouths unhinged so that their chins touched the bottoms of their necks, the song rising like colored, vaporous smoke from twisting, writhing throats open to the air. Their tongues had long since vanished from their mouths, unneeded since the song no longer made use of the spoken word, and as Durnlow and the other men watched, their teeth dropped from their open mouths one by one. On the wall behind them had appeared in the markings of the same color as the music, a great and hellish set of symbols, drawn without human hands, a name blasphemous beyond all reckoning. with the powers of the Creator's wrath to be visited upon those who had manifested such a mighty and unapologetic evil into the once holy sanctuary. Aghast, Durnlow and some of the other men fled the sanctum. Others remained behind, petrified, and would not be seen again. Each member of Tameworth who had not been drawn in as a member of the Ashen Choir fled to his or her home, seeking shelter from the song, but finding none all throughout the night. Dawn broke over the merciful silence of Tameworth, with no one daring to venture out of their home. It was only after a full day and a welcome silent night had passed that a few of the men, including Durnlow, carefully crept back to St. Aderin's Rest to investigate what had become of their beloved sanctum. The ghastly, devilish symbol was gone from the back wall behind the choir loft. Upon the loft's pews, the teeth that had fallen from the mouths of the Ashen Choir. The only other evidence of what had taken place there was on the walls and the floor, for at the conclusion of the nameless profane ritual, the horror from beyond had come to claim its own, leaving only dusty black shadows on the walls where the choir had stood, and identical sooty imprints upon the floor where the hapless men had fallen and failed to escape. With his tale concluded, Halbert Durnlow was taken by the wardens and transported to Belhaven to give his account to the High Sanctum Assembly of the Fagar. What came next is still in doubt to this day. According to the high priests of the order, Durnlow's story is a source of controversy and disagreement. To some, it is a horrifically imagined nightmare that serves as a warning of the dangers of deviating from the sanctioned chants of the Creator's law. For others, the Ashen Song and anything like it is counted as corrupted worship, allowing the priesthood to label both those who refer to it as heretics and also brand them as madmen for believing in a myth about failure of discipline that caused an outbreak of mass hysteria. But what some Fagar of the time feared, those who chose sight instead of blindness, was investigated quietly, looking past the traumatized, shattered mind of Halbert Durnlow, who met his tragic end mysteriously and rather conveniently in the dungeons of the Sakalamnium in Belhaven. For the Ashen Choir was not the first to harness the discovered energies of divine sound, using them to experiment with new liturgy. Nor, in their minds, was Father Anselm Greyspire truly duped into inviting Corvin Althiel into his chantry in Tameworth as an unwitting pawn. Today, there is no record of the account of Halbert Durnlow in the civic registry, nor does the name Corvin Althiel appear whatsoever. If you wish to know the truth of what took place in Tameworth, you must travel through the hazardous Fideb forest in the dead of winter and take the long road up the slope of the unscaled summit to the town in question. And you must go to the hilltop, where the scattered stones of St. Aderin's Rest remain, where they fell after Father Greyspire hung himself from the bell rope in the sanctum's steeple. And standing among the ruins of the sanctum, you must wait until the snow no longer muffles the air with its falling, and allow the soft, humming discord to float slowly over the fields and worm its way into your ears. And if you listen to the humming melody, you will begin to mouth the words of the Ashen Song, though you do not know them. According to the old tale-tellers of Tameworth, if you remain long enough to learn the words, you too can join the Ashen Choir. For singing is to live, but to sing in their eternal voice is to never truly die. Thanks for listening to one of my horror fantasy folktales, dark little legends from the world of my next novel, The Decay. These stories come from the land of Zarathis, a place of old magic, buried terrors, broken truths, and places where reality has worn thin enough for nightmares to press their fingers through. Some tales are warnings, some are fragments of history, and some are lies that have survived long enough to grow teeth of their own. As The Decay draws closer, these folk tales offer glimpses into the world behind the novel, fears, myths, and the shadows its people have learned not to name. Once again, thanks for listening, and tread carefully. In Zarathis, very few voices can be trusted.